You're listening to Savory. It's about the people and processes behind food production and the politics that shape our understanding of the food system. I'm your host, Marika Dunham. On this episode of Savory, I talked to Sarah McJannet and Krystle TenBrink about their work in local government and nonprofits incorporating food policy into the community agenda.
Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this. My name is Sarah McJannet. I'm a registered professional planner with the District of Squamish employed as a senior planner. And I have a diverse role within the municipality and my role as planner. So I do a lot of long-range planning, land and marine spatial planning, a lot of policy work, which is where right now where a lot of the food focus is centering. And I also have a healthy community focus that has grown in the last few years. So a lot of that healthy community work is centering around food as a priority health area for the community of Squamish. And I also do a lot of work around collaborations and partnerships, and that's how I've gotten to know Krystle and the work of Squamish CAN and the Squamish Food Policy Council.
Hello, my name is Krystle TenBrink, and I'm a director with the Squamish Climate Action Network and also a food projects manager with the Squamish Food Policy Council. Thanks for having me here. And Squamish CAN has been around for about 11 years now, and I got involved before we even had a name, so it started in true grassroots fashion. So when Squamish CAN was getting together and figuring out what it was going to focus on, sustainable food system work was very much one of our top priorities, along with zero waste and other energy initiatives. And some of the first projects that we started working on was establishing community gardens because Squamish had only had one at the time, and there ended up being some support from Vancouver Coastal Health's community food action initiative to help fund the expansion of food education programs and initiatives in Squamish.
I think from my perspective, the interest and the connection with food in local government work that we do is really, when we talk about community sustainability and resilience, food and the food system is such an important part of that. And so increasingly what I've seen is just through work in the community, a lot more focus around the entire food system and how is that interacting in the fabric of our community and how does that get supported or not? What are the barriers to greater food production in the region? There's important land use considerations there. And so that's sort of one of the initial touch points, I think, for local government being a land use regulator, essentially, through bylaws and community plans and such. So that's kind of one of the key areas where local governments are kind of engaging. But then far beyond that, I think what we've learned here in Squamish in working with the Food Policy Council and Squamish CAN is that there's a bigger opportunity to connect in with a bigger network, a food system network, through nonprofits, through the work of the Food Policy Council, which has these links to local government, but also is a living, breathing kind of policy council that kind of is advocating strongly and going out and mobilizing resources to help support that work within the community. So that's a really new and really amazing touch point that local government is hosting jointly with the Food Policy Council.
Yeah, and I think Sarah brings up an interesting point because while Squamish CAN is truly a grassroots organization and has functioned as so for the last decade, moving forward into our second decade, we've seen the value of working collaboratively with local government and regional governments to help action item and support some of the bigger picture initiatives around planning and establishing vision, policy, doing education and whatnot to help support some of the changes that are essential to remove barriers, like Sarah said, for people to produce food, to sell food, and to engage in the food system in multiple ways.
I'm wondering if you could, building off of that, speak to what specifically the Squamish Food Policy Council has been doing, and like what is the work of the Squamish Food Policy Council, and how would you explain it to someone who doesn't know much about food systems?
So the Squamish Food Policy Council had actually come out of a initiative to establish a food charter. And so I'll back up a little bit. Vancouver Coastal Health, Squamish CAN, many other organizations within the Squamish community came together to build a Squamish food charter. The intention of the charter is really, a 2-page document that helps flush out all of our priorities around the food system, including culturally appropriate food, food access for all, healthy, nutritious food for all, that sort of thing. And once we had that food charter complete and supported by many different folks, individuals and organizations, we took it to council to ask them to endorse the charter, and they did. And from that, we've been able to roll out a food policy council, which basically takes the items of the charter and looks at how can we engage our community members, organizations, local governments, and citizens in moving forward big picture food policy that will sort of have this top-down approach, but also a ground-up approach as well, because it's about people moving forward important initiatives that they want to see. And there was a perfect opportunity for a food policy council to form. We had some support by an organization from the BC Food Systems Network and from Vancouver Coastal Health to help support us in understanding what is a food policy council and what is our job. And so it really is a food policy council is a network of people that can come together to have input on where they want to see their food system in the future. And we specifically sort of target various initiatives. We had actually lucked out because when we had started a few years ago, the District of Squamish was doing their official community plan, which is planning for the... Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The community plan is our long-range, key kind of highest level plan and blueprint for how we want to move forward into the future.
Mm-hmm. So there was an opportunity to naturally tie in vision, long-term planning, and some policy statements within the official community plan, which we were able to take, and we sort of ran with it.
It was super great because the Food Policy Council was a key group that helped us actually craft the entire food systems chapter of our Squamish 2040 community plan. So we were able to, once endorsed by council and the community, that food charter ended up being embedded and the foundation for the food system and the food policy in the plan. So I think in our former OCP official community plan, we maybe had, 1-2 policies that really focused in on food. And now we have, quite a lengthy chapter around food system or food policy. And it's also, it has informed other policy within the plan as well. So it's pretty far reaching, and we wouldn't have been able to do that work and without the Food Policy Council involved in kind of co-writing that. And then similarly, we were able to do some great workshops and things and engagement that supported that work. So we ended up sort of doing an initial preliminary map and tried to map out the local food system in Squamish. And then we did a bunch of deep dives within the community. These were kind of focused policy deep dives and kind of helped spur a whole bunch of kind of kitchen table conversations within the community around food, which was fantastic. And as a result, I think we have a really food-focused, food-forward community plan, and that the impact of that is that when you have strong policy, that really helps to drive decision-making within the community. So that's municipal budget, capital projects, servicing. It drives land use decisions. At the core, that policy is really an important foundation. So I think we're in a better place today than we were 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. And I would also add that with the Food Policy Council working closely with Sarah and other district staff and leadership, we've been able to really leverage additional opportunities for funding. One example would be the District of Squamish, along with the SLRD Area D and the Squamish Food Policy Council, was able to come together, partner, and ask for additional funding and support from the Ministry of Agriculture to initiate an agriculture land use inventory, which is sort of the first key piece that we needed to get done before we went to ask for additional funding for to establish an agriculture plan and to actually get one done. And we're excited to say that that has been completed now and has leveraged that funding and continues to as we start to wrap up our first draft of the Squamish Valley Agriculture Area Plan.
Yeah.
Plan.
Mm-hmm. And we've been speaking to a bit like the role that policy plays in the food system, but I'm wondering if you could speak more directly to how exactly policy is incorporated into the food system and what is the role of policy in, like, we're talking a lot about sustainable food systems and the future of the food system.
I've got one initial example that I can provide right off the top, which is how policy informed by the food charter I have two examples, actually. The first is how policy that was developed to support increased agriculture production. And so that policy sits within the community plan. And one way that we can deliver on that and what was surfaced through our work and engagement with the Food Policy Council is that there is a lot of misalignment right now in terms of land use regulation. We have sort of some very old zones, rural residential zones, where lands that are designated under the agricultural land reserve are, there's a misalignment basically between municipal and provincial regulation. And that's one area that we're going to be targeting through our municipal zoning update. So that policy is actually informing regulatory changes that will help to better align the goals and objectives and the regulations for agriculture at the municipal level. So, and that will help to alleviate a lot of the disconnects that are happening that are creating barriers basically for farming activity within the community. And then another, I think, really tangible example also of kind of policy informing action and shifts is policy that was created around supporting increased food assets within neighborhoods. And that follows from the charter in terms of access for healthy food for all within the community and being able to ensure that all neighborhoods have opportunities for food production and food growing, and then also for food retail. And so we're a very spread out community in Squamish also, and there's transportation difficulties in moving from one area of town to the other, and food opportunities for gardens, food retail. All these things are actually also creating pretty important food connections and social connections within the community as well. So some of that policy is really helping to inform land use decisions and, rezonings where land developers are wanting to or are being asked basically to provide space for food production within their developments, as an example, but also in informing kind of creation of neighborhood hubs that can incorporate food in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. in building off talking about like food policy and the Food Policy Council, I'm wondering what are, Krystle, from your perspective, some of the problems with the food system that nonprofits like Squamish CAN and the Food Policy Council are trying to solve?
Where do I begin? I think there are so many intersections where food impacts the environment and human health, animal health, well-being, etc. So, and obviously from your podcast, you've probably, from your interviews and research and your knowledge, we know that this is a complex, very complex system with a lot of moving parts. And some of the key themes that sort of come out for me are the direct linkages to health. And the research has shown that if we can, that there is a direct correlation between what people are putting in their bodies and their connection to health and illness and et cetera. And that could be everything from diabetes to other illnesses, et cetera. So it can be quite severe. I also think about this social connectedness. If I think about sort of on the upswing, Sarah had already mentioned it, that food projects and initiatives in the community can really bring out the social connectedness piece in a time where we all live in our own homes and sort of in our own silos. Having public space where all are welcome to come to are so important, and that's for other public spaces as well. So it's not just private spaces or our own homes, it's getting out and connecting. And food is a really, I think, over time and over evolution, we can see that food has always gathered people together. So I think the social connectedness piece is a really big part of the food system. I also think it helps build community and remove silos for professionals like Sarah and I who are working, in very different sectors, but we can come together and work on the same initiatives and learn so much about the systems in which we work. And I think that's a really important piece. When I think of bigger picture food system work, I think of who is doing what and are we working together. I think the example of the Squamish Food Policy Council, Squamish Climate Action Network, the both regional and municipal government working together on various initiatives are great examples of what can be done in a short time frame when you work together versus on your own. I also think of, in terms of additional challenges, I think of sort of the disconnect that young people have had. Most of us live in urbanized areas and don't necessarily have access to see how food is grown, to see how food is processed, and to be a part of that. And I love that there's more and more opportunities popping up for young people to get involved, to understand that an apple grows on a tree and a leek grows out of the ground, and understanding the life cycle around the food system and how it relates to many things in their life. And we've had some really big aha moments from some of the initiatives that we've been able to roll out, specifically working within the school system. And I think Sarah had already mentioned it earlier, but I do think barriers for new and existing farmers are, for us, I think, quite a high priority to start supporting, to support and remove those barriers, because they are some of the people that are going to feed our future. And so how do we make sure that they have access to land, that they can have a life themselves and have balance and raise a family and do what they need to do, all the while providing food for people, healthy food for our community members. Yeah. So those are a few things.
Could you quickly touch on what the barriers are for new farmers?
Yeah, maybe I'll let Sarah touch base on that.
One major barrier that has shown up here, but also in other communities, especially in BC and southwestern BC, is access to affordable land for farming. And in Squamish, as in other locations, the cost of land being driven up and kind of intensive growth, residential growth as well, has been putting increasing pressure on prices and escalating prices. And so that is really tricky for existing agriculture, but then also for new entrants and people trying to lease out land or purchase land for farming. And that's also where some of the regulatory pieces need to come in and be considered in terms of making sure that land that is good for agriculture is being prioritized and regulated for that type of use. There's also some gaps in the overall system. So beyond production, on the processing, storage, and transportation front for food that is being produced, some of the processing and storage and facilities and infrastructure that can support food basically getting to market is not here or is further away, and so requires people growing and producing product in this region to have to leave the community to, for example, to process poultry or livestock or things like that. And so there's additional costs for that as well. We know from the agricultural land use inventory that Krystle mentioned that was done in 2017 that we have a really productive good base for farming within the Squamish Valley and the larger region. We do, though, have a lot of land that's in its sort of natural forested state, which requires costs for clearing in order to bring that land into production. So there are some of those types of realities, I think, that exist. And also, while drainage isn't an issue, because we have such a lovely kind of wetter environment, we do need to consider kind of this overlay of hazard also within the community. It creates new opportunities as well. So as the bigger context for Squamish is that, we're in the floodplain. We have an extensive system of diking works that do help to protect against flood events, but there's a lot of area that is, underprotected and that needs to be reinforced. But that creates new opportunity where we're at a bigger level in the district of Squamish. We're trying to do a lot of really thoughtful planning around land use to ensure that the highest hazard areas, we're not building out in the highest hazard areas, but that creates opportunity for other types of uses like agricultural uses within some of those higher hazard floodplain areas as well. So there's barrier, and then there's also new opportunity that are being presented. So.
Mm-hmm. So we've been addressing the problems in the food system that you see from your perspective in policy and in nonprofits. And Krystle, I'm wondering from you, what do you think the role is of nonprofits within the Canadian food system?
I think in terms of the role of nonprofits in the Canadian, in the context for the Canadian food system, I think that we can be sort of the center of information and the center of movement. And what I mean by that is I think we've given lots of examples of, Sarah's role within local government, and we haven't really spoke much about, the role of the province within policy and how that sort of trickles down into how it might support a nonprofit. And it does. There's funding streams and funding opportunities from provincial and federal governments and whatnot to support food system work. But the role in which nonprofits play, that I see a common theme across the province and probably across the country, is that we are sort of the folks that are maybe gathering of everyone together and getting people getting the right people in the same room, having important conversations, and moving together on high priorities rather than sort of moving separately on different initiatives or different programs. So I see a lot more collaboration happening, which is really nice. And that's been a theme that we've seen increase over the last 10 years. I've been a part of this in doing this work. And in particular, what I think is great is funders are also starting to work together. Also, majority of nonprofits get a lot of, so, they're able to exist and do what they do because of the funding that exists. And when funders are able to prioritize food system initiatives and also work together to sort of be able to support nonprofits with even more financial support to ensure that we're paying livable wages for staff and that we have meaningful employment, they're safe, and there's long-term employment, whereas it can be challenging having a nonprofit and working in the food system because you never know if your grant if you're gonna be successful in the grant that you applied for last year. You don't know if the priorities may change of the funder. So there's a lot of unknowns as a nonprofit. And I think the more knowns that we can have is going to help streamline and maintain the work that we're able to do for the long haul. And I think some of those conversations are happening. We're not quite there yet. I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but I think we will hopefully get there. And there's some really key people who have been pretty amazing at helping fund this work. In particular, the Real Estate Foundation of British Columbia has been really great. Different community foundations, local governments, and many other funders in the community, oftentimes like Vancouver Coastal Health. So our regional health authorities have been really supportive. Would love to see even more support from them because there is such a direct connection to health when really that's their main focus is health and wellness for all.
So we've been talking a lot about bigger picture policies and issues and what the rollout of that looks like kind of on a larger time scale. And I'm curious what the day-to-day looks like for you guys and your work, and how would you describe the work that you do to someone who's not familiar with the food system and with the processes of government and non-policy and nonprofit?
That's a great question. A day in the life. Well, it's never the same. Every day is a different day, is a new day. I would say that a typical day for me is really, it's pretty diverse actually. So it's, it's a mix of policy and plan review. I might be working on engagement process to facilitate and, help co-convene a discussion around a food topic, for example, with the Squamish Food Policy Council. I do a lot of drafting of bylaws and regulation, which ends up getting referred out to the Food Policy Council or to other levels of government. There's data collection and analysis and working with different organizations and then also within different departments within the municipality. And then a lot of kind of troubleshooting and, responding to inquiries and things like that. One example of kind of data collection and analysis that has a direct link with the Food Policy Council is that from the food charter, from the food policy, we ended up establishing a indicator. We have a series of 32 community performance indicators within our community plan that we've committed to track and report on annually to measure our progress moving forward. And that one of them is around the increase and the establishment of food assets within neighborhoods. So the Food Policy Council created a food asset map, and it's actually something that's kind of living and continuously updated. So we've been working with the Food Policy Council to basically define those food assets within the community. They are mapped spatially and then categorized, and so we're able to actually track spatially as well as by type the food assets within the community. And so we can actually monitor that over time. We can look at where there's gaps, and that can really help inform us as we continue on our quest for improving the food systems together. So that's a cool example.
And I think, like Sarah, the day-to-day of running a nonprofit and leading a nonprofit is also very complex and diverse, and is sometimes a little chaotic. It is absolutely chaotic at times. Day-to-day, we're constantly thinking about how do we sustain the work we do? That is always the big question at the end of the day. And so when you break that down, it looks like, where do we fundraise? Who fundraises? What are those deadlines? What are our priorities? And so we do a lot of community engagement and also working with our members and board members and staff to determine what are our priorities, what do we have the current capacity for, and do we want to expand capacity? Currently Squamish CAN has many, many projects on the go, and we've decided to not take on any new projects until we have self-sustained the work that we are doing to a level that we are all very happy with, and people see us as leaders in the community with regards to the important climate action work that we do. So our focus is that for the next little bit, and even though we've been around for 10, 11 years now, we still have a lot of internal administrative items that have to get done, and so we're working on that as well. So job descriptions, contracts. Do you have a job description? Do you know what you're supposed to be doing? How do we budget? And so there's a lot of moving parts. You're essentially running a business, and but there's no guaranteed way to get income. So it's an interesting place to be in. At the same time, what I love about the nonprofit work is that it brings together people very intentionally. You don't really, you'll know right away if it's for you. And the people that are involved and the people who have contributed in particular to the Squamish CAN and Food Policy Council have very intentionally chosen to be a part of it. So this work typically attracts very passionate individuals who are ready to, take on and do what it takes in order to get the job done, in order to launch a new initiative, apply for that grant, host a 200-person farm-to-table dinner under the stars in the Squamish Valley, whatever it takes, right? So, yeah.
We've talked a bit about like a day in the life for each of you, and you guys have both been in these positions for quite a long time. I'm wondering, what are some of the issues and challenges you've faced in this work, and how this position has changed, if at all, during the time that you've been involved?
I can speak about some of the challenges and issues that I have faced while in multiple positions within Squamish CAN and the Climate Action and the Food Policy Council. I think I already touched base on it, but it's really not having sustainable funding as a nonprofit is definitely one of our major challenges. I think that we have demonstrated value in the community and trust, and that we are an organization that people want to work with. And I'm so thankful for one of our founders, Anna Santos, who is and also previous president, who had right off the bat established that we were going to be a group that worked with people, not against. And even if we had opposing views, we would practice our active listening skills and consider them, and consider working with folks that maybe are just not all environmentalists, sort of, quote unquote. So I'm thankful. I think that is one of our major successes. And then a challenge is absolutely, how do we sustain the work that we do? And with so much of an influx of new faces coming into town, how do we engage our new citizens that are arriving and welcome them, but also share with them some of the values that Squamish has very clearly demonstrated over the last 10 years that are important to them? And how do we get people involved? So, yeah.
Those are great examples. I was thinking in a similar way with local government, working with limited resources and trying to maximize the work that can happen and the impact and the outcomes and things. I think in the last decade, I've been in Squamish for 13 years, and in that time, we've just seen growth in the community exponentially increase. And there's a bunch of different reasons for that. But I think at the end of the day, in every day and in our work kind of throughout, there's always the challenge of managing competing interests within the community. And when it comes to land use, we have a limited land base. We have a lot of hazardous and very sensitive, ecologically sensitive lands as well. And so when it comes to managing land use within the community, there's always competing interests. We also need a lot of affordable housing to accommodate existing deficit in affordable housing, but also thinking to the future. And so with all those things at play, there's always going to be trade-offs. And so through our work with our municipal council and with community, the hardest part and the most meaningful part is trying to host conversations about what are our values, what are we trying to achieve collectively, what are the different interests, how do we reconcile those interests, what are the trade-offs. And there are trade-offs, and we have a really aspirational and ambitious community plan with a lot of different objectives, and sometimes we can advance and achieve some goals, but that means that we have to in some of those cases we're not advancing in other areas. So we just have to make sure that we're having open discussion and meaningful discussion about what those trade-offs are, and then trying together to sort of make the best decisions with the information that we have. And I think the other thing that's overlying everything is just where we are right now in terms of trying to plan for climate change and mitigation and adaptation. And this is top of mind also because Squamish, like many other communities, has just declared a climate emergency. And then we're grappling with, how are we going to operationalize that? How are we going to prioritize some things over others? And that's not always, those are tough discussions in the community, and not everyone is in the same place. So it's also about trying to find the best path forward and help everyone in the community thrive, because that underlying all this is, making sure that everyone is able to have their basic needs met, and for everyone to thrive within the community. And there's a lot of people that are vulnerable also, so we have to be mindful of how the decisions that we're making are influencing and impacting people in the community.
I think Sarah brings up a really good point that I failed to mention around just the climate action piece, and how it's quite a daunting thought to think about how do I as a citizen, or how do I as a small nonprofit, that takes up a very small space on Earth, contribute to climate action and climate adaptation and or mitigation. And it could be really daunting, but I'm thankful that we have optimistic minds and attitudes to be able to keep conversations going, working together. But like Sarah said, I think it's absolutely a very sort of challenging piece that all of us deal with as citizens, but also in our own professional roles as well. And times are changing fast, and that's sort of scary for people. Yeah.
I'm wondering how you both first got involved and started with the nonprofit scene and with policy, if you knew this was something that you wanted to be doing, or how did you end up in the positions that you're in today?
This is a fun question because it relates to careers, career journeys. So, I was in university. I was a Capilano University student, and I was working towards an outdoor recreation diploma, which would turn into a degree. And what's kind of neat about that program is that it intersects policy, specifically sort of environmental policy, and how that relates to the experience of tourism and outdoor recreating. And, you kind of get taught how to be a leader and all of these things. And you kind of get exposed to a lot of the issues that are happening, in particular in BC, that might intersect with outdoor recreation. And the program leader had brought in Alexander Morton. And Alexander Morton is a marine biologist in British Columbia who originally was studying whales, but soon shifted her area of study to salmon. And in particular, then dedicated, the last 20 years of her life trying to remove the major, the fish farms off the major migration routes of the sockeye salmon. And when she had come into class and spoke, we were able to speak, very casually after the session. And I was pretty in awe by the work that she had done, and also her dedication and commitment to the environment, to whales and then salmon, and just how loud her voice and her message has carried, not only through small communities across BC that are heavily impacted by this issue, but also how it transferred all the way around the world, because people seek out sockeye salmon in particular. It's used and sold as a Canadian product, etc., and yet it's a very vulnerable species. And so I was quite inspired by her. And then when I had moved to Squamish about 12 years ago, I had met a woman named Anna Santos, and she had come in to my work at the time and was quite interested in hosting a climate action series, a movie series at the Adventure Center. And so I had helped and started volunteering my time to help her out. And then before you know it, after 8 movies and lots of discussions and a lot of laughs, we ended up drinking beers a few weeks later and determining that Squamish does need a climate action group, and that we were going to move forward on creating one and getting to work. And so that's how I got involved in this organization.
That's cool. So my journey to Squamish and planning and policy was just sort of fluid. I come from a geography background. I have a geography degree, and earth and ocean science really captured my heart. And then I discovered community planning, and that seemed like a natural progression, because I really wanted to move to action and understand kind of how policy can drive action, I guess. And I had a neat moment. The community plan update that Krystle mentioned that has happened in Squamish over the last few years, that was a major project that we undertook. And I was actually really hesitant to get involved and kind of co-lead the OCP update. And I guess it was intimidating. I was actually not I wasn't really sold on the community plan. I just thought, is this thing obsolete and outdated? Like, who reads policy anyway? What's the big deal? Anyway, and so I kind of, in reflecting now that we've updated the plan, I see more clearly now why policy is so important. And through that process, we were really unpacking policy, capital P, like what is good policy? How do you write good policy? What's, token, what's motherhood statements, what has impact, what's really going to help to drive good decisions. And, and then we also thought about the different roles that municipalities play and as regulators, and what about advocacy and policy that is all about collaboration and working with others sort of outside the more traditional sphere of where local government work sits. So I think within the community plan, we really tried to go deeper with the policy writing. it's still a beast of a plan, but at the same time, it was cool to try and figure out how to weave all these different interests in the community and important directions. I saw firsthand, I had a cool moment where a community member came to a council meeting maybe 6 months ago, and she, came forward and said, here's work that really needs to happen. It was talking about the need to consider in more depth wildlife corridors and wildlife movement within the community. And she quoted the community plan and said, here it is. It says here that this is really important. And she was part of the community plan development. And, it's a reflection of the interests, values, and priorities that are coming from the community. Anyway, it was just one of those moments where, the plan was being held up, reflected back at council, and council's like, yeah, that's what it says. And you're right. And, how are we going to incorporate and address this within our budget and priority? And so, it's on the table, and we're going to have to figure that out. But it was just one of those moments where I thought, here's a great moment where I felt like a community member was like holding it up, saying, this is a reflection of what we want to see. And so that was just a great reinforcement of why policy, how it works, and how it can inform and guide us.
That's awesome.
You guys speak very passionately about the work that you do, and it seems very meaningful to both of you in different ways. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how this work is meaningful for you and what you enjoy about the work that you're doing.
So I think, you graduate from high school and you have no idea where you're going. Maybe you're forced to go to school. Maybe you want to go to school. Maybe you just need to take some time off and go traveling and whatnot. And it's kind of being a young adult can be very confusing. Sometimes as confusing as a teenager. And I think I had always known that I had this fire in me, but I didn't have it lit. It wasn't lit yet. And I was constantly striving to figure out what it was that sort of allowed me to be me and to thrive in whatever role that might have found me or that I found. And I have worked in many different areas. I have worked in many different fields, different jobs, different places, and in many different capacities with different hats on. And I've tried a lot of things just to sample it out. And at the end of the day, while I have learned so much from all of those different roles, I keep coming back to the work that I do with the food system. And I think it's because it brings people together naturally, which is such a natural human need to bring people together and to have meaningful conversations. I love that people are not afraid to just say what's on their mind, and I hope that I can help provide space for people to speak freely about how they feel and the impact that challenges or successes may have with regards to the food system on their own life. And I also I'm very motivated by hands-on, but also sort of like the short-term and the long-term goals. And when you're in this role, I'm getting my hands dirty and, walking through farms and seeing if, how much acres of land people are growing. And I'm, serving food at different fundraisers, and I'm organizing events. And so there's never a dull moment. I'm always doing something completely different. I love interacting with community members and hearing what they have to say, but also getting a chance to share back what's already been happening or what has happened and what continues to happen and how there might be alignments to get them involved. And at the end of the day, I see that there is so much that has happened in the last 10 to 12 years, but in particular, since the Food Policy Council has been able to really work with our Jerry Caston, who you already had on the podcast, and Sarah, and other district staff and leadership. It's been really cool to see the pace at which food systems has been a priority and how fast change has been happening. And I never thought we would be where we are today. And it's been, it's like a fun surprise every year to think back and reflect on what we've accomplished in a very short period of time with very limited resources. But I think planning out how you're going to work together and who's doing what can really accelerate those initiatives and programs. And I think Sarah might be able to relate to this, because very much we may work on some things together, but she will have a very specific role with that project and I will as well, and then we'll come back together. So it's been a really efficient process, I think.
That's cool. I'm with Krystle. I hear a lot of what you're saying.
Yeah.
And can feel the same way. I think what is super motivating for me is the opportunity to work with a diverse range of people and organizations within the community. And it's kind of at that intersection where there's just so much potential for change and for positive progression. And I like working with lots of different disciplines. I'm really interdisciplinary that way. I like the synthesis that needs to happen and the different perspectives that come to play. I like working with different perspectives. People have lots of different knowledge that can help us solve the tricky problems that we're trying to sort through, and that can also be very challenging too. But I think I get really stoked on bringing people together. It's also exhausting, and sometimes there's conflict that you have to manage as well. But I think overall, I know that people are passionate about their living and their place. So it's really about just kind of trying to help bring that energy in together in a positive way, and helping to support the community. I'm really stoked on everything to do with community, and I love Squamish. I love all the people that have come to this place, and I think it's really cool to be in a community that's so engaged. We don't have an issue with engagement. I think people are so engaged, at the risk of burnout, and I'm so grateful for that engaged state, and it means that people care a lot, and I honor that and just want to work hard to continue to help advance all of our important work that we have to do.
I'm wondering what your long-term goals are for your engagement with the food system.
I have one thought around just engagement generally. I think we've done so far a good job of engaging people, and I think there's a lot of folks that we haven't reached yet that remain to be engaged through this process. And I'm hoping through our egg plan, for example, that's a draft is going to be coming out soon, and there's an opportunity really to pull people in around that. I think there's a lot of interest in food, and we've got engagement going with kind of core groups, and we have a steering committee that we're working with. I'm really excited about the future opportunity and work and effort that we need to take around engaging with Squamish First Nation and other cultural communities within town. And so I think there's a lot of important work ahead to do more of that, and to make sure that Indigenous values and knowledge and perspectives are included with all of the work that we're doing around the food system. And there's more. Yeah, there's a lot more work ahead, and we're starting to build those relationships and forge those connections, and it's just a matter of prioritizing and continuing with that work, and we'll get there. And yeah, so I think there's lots more on the engagement.
I think Sarah touched on a really important point, which is about reconciling and decolonizing our food system. I think that's a really important conversation that folks within the food system who work within government or nonprofit or citizens have been having, and there's even been workshops and trainings and being able to foster conversations with Indigenous community members to listen about, just to learn and to listen and to learn about understanding their community needs and perspectives, and how do we move forward? How do we move forward sort of within this complex food system? One of, you'd asked about long-term goals for engagement, and one of the other exciting pieces that the Squamish Food Policy Council does is that we're part of a larger community of practice, and that's through what used to be the BC Food System Network, and is now led by the BC Food Security Gateway Project, and that is an initiative from the Provincial Health Services Authority, and they've been able to foster conversation, engagement, and really important dialogue around all staff and leaders who do what I do and what Sarah does, and Jerry as well. They have regional dietitians as part of this group. And there's, I think, maybe over 60, 70 members across the province of BC that come together in these sort of online platforms where we can where we can share about our own successes and challenges, learn from one another, and then have opportunities for ongoing connection. And so while I've been able, when the Squamish food policy was getting its roots, we were able to lean on other organizations and experts who had already come before us to do this. And now we get to be those leaders and help teach others about, this is what worked for us, this is not what worked for us, here's what I would recommend moving forward, and support them. And we've done so many, we've been working with the Municipality of Revelstoke and a few other sort of mountain towns to help support them, as a lot of our experiences here in Squamish are quite relatable to smaller towns that may be near a city or not near a city. And I'm sure Sarah can also relate to this, that city planners probably have opportunities to get together as well. And I think the Squamish Official Community Plan has been recognized as a really great plan that other communities are looking at in considering who is doing best practices, what is some of the most innovative official community plans that are out there. So it's been nice that so much has been given to us in order to be able to get us here, and now we're able to give back and to help other communities thrive and plan this meaningful work as best as they can.
Kind of going back to the context of BC, I'm wondering what you think the biggest challenges of the food system are right now from your perspectives.
I think the comments that I made around challenges for Squamish around land for production, affordability, those are what I was thinking of that were kind of also challenges at the provincial level. I think that, the food system, food system locally, regionally, provincially, they're all connected. And so challenges that are showing up for us here locally are also probably to some extent kind of showing up in at other scales as well. But I think overall within the South Coast region, I won't say for the rest of the province is really diverse, and obviously the development pressures are not the same in some of the other more kind of rural or areas outside the Lower Mainland. But I think there's been such a a strong influence around external factors and investment from outside of the province and outside of the country too, that is really playing, as we're starting to see and appreciate, such a big role in the land economics locally. And so I think that's that whole land access and affordability piece is probably one of the biggest pieces. And again, what's overarching all of that is just kind of shifts that are happening in the climate quickly, and that we're all going to have to sort of mobilize around and face. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I'll add to that with, high cost of living, which Sarah already had touched on. Our cost of living is going up without our wages increasing to support that, thus having an increase in people who are food insecure. So, and then also experiencing food security challenges. So that's a really tough one. Other current challenges, like I have already mentioned, is how do we decolonize our food system? And that's a very large, daunting topic. And, we've been having conversations for a while, but it's still a big challenge, and things are moving forward, and it's a slow process, and I'm looking forward to working on some specific initiatives that will help with that. And how do we achieve food sovereignty and resiliency within our food system when we're in a very dynamic climate and sort of unknowns for the next, 10 to 20, 30 years. I might also add that while we've been speaking so much about the food system, and I think we mostly think about it in terms of land, I do want to acknowledge that water and fish are a big part of our food system. And I know that there are many challenges and complexities with that, but, the fish is very much part of our food system. I think there are many threats with regards to having healthy fisheries, coastal and fishing communities, with the increase of privatization of this really valuable resource. There are many coastal communities across BC that depend on this resource. And I know that there's been some policy changes to try to ensure that local fisher people are the ones with the rights to the various leases and whatnot, rather than sort of the capitalization of a monopoly of one or two people having those leases and sort of being the only people that really benefit from it. So I'm looking forward to sort of more shifts within the food system. So more money is going back into the pockets of the people that are actually doing all or most of the work. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Small goals, really.
We've touched on this quite a bit, but I'm wondering if you guys could address specifically how you think we should be addressing the challenges of the food system.
I think the biggest focus right now in Squamish is around bringing more agriculture land that's available and good for agriculture into production. I think that is one of the core pieces that we're trying to address through the ag plan that's under development. We have a lot of lands that are not being actively used for agricultural production, and it's not because there's no demand for local food. There's a huge demand, and there's so much interest in local food, but to be able to really encourage that as a sector, and then there's all these additional opportunities through agritourism and agritech and all kinds of associated activity and industry that can kind of come with that. But we do need to unlock, I think, the land base to allow for more food production here. And, it's great that we are working with the SLRD as well, because it's not just there's District of Squamish, but beyond Squamish, in the upper kind of reaches of Squamish Valley and Paradise Valley, there are, additional lands too. And so we're not going to be able to address this in isolation. And the word food shed has been used in the past. And I think we just are part of this larger region. And even if you go further north, up to Whistler and beyond through Pemberton and Lillooet, like we are part of this larger region. So I think that's the agricultural land production is one of the biggest pieces I think that we're trying to grapple with right now. And then from that, we can move to other components of the food system that also need to be the infrastructural piece that needs to go along with that. I think those are key.
Yeah, if I can, I'll build off of what Sarah spoke about. And I think once we have some of those pieces in conjunction at the same time, we need to be thinking about where's our market. It's so important that, yes, land, we need more land. We need more food production happening on land. We need, innovative practices and techniques that are going to be climate friendly and support wildlife corridors and all of these important things. But also, how do we get our food to market, and how do we make fresh food accessible to everyone, and how do we make it culturally appropriate? So I think there's a lot of sort of social challenges and economic challenges on top of that as well. And I think that a key part of us moving forward is going to be working together and working collaboratively. There are
in a food hub,
yeah.
A food web.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And I think a great example is the work that Young Agrarians is doing, and they've really taken what we could perceive as a small element to the agriculture world to remove barriers for new farmers to get mentorship and remove barriers for leasing opportunities, etc., which they've ultimately had a huge impact and have filled an absolute necessary need and a gap that existed. And so organizations like Young Agrarians and the work that, each community members are doing and the knowledge that we're able to share, I think will be so pivotal as we move forward in addressing challenges.
Thank you guys both so much for being here. My last question for you is if there is anything else you would like to talk about that I haven't asked or that we haven't had the opportunity to touch on yet.
Do you have another hour?
I'm all day.
I was going to pose a question just around, Marika, your perspective too, just in terms of institutions and educational partners and things, and how I think that I see a greater opportunity that exists around food research, education, and those components, and curious if you see some areas or opportunities where you think that we could grow that in Squamish.
That's a great question. I definitely think that there's opportunity to grow that, and a great conversation to have while Krystle's in the room as the career development coordinator. What's your title?
Manager of Career Services and Experiential Learning.
Yeah, as the manager of experiential learning, from just a Quest perspective, there are so many students who are interested in being engaged in the food system, and I really do think there is an opportunity to further relationships with the district and with community groups in Squamish and provide those experiential learning opportunities in a mutually beneficial way for students to be gaining experience, but also reproducing or creating products and research that is useful for the community. So I definitely think there's a lot of opportunity there.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm. And I might just add that I think there are some great examples over the last 5 to 10 years where we have had students involved in the doing food system work. It was 2 students that made the Squamish Food Asset Maps, or the Squamish to Lillooet Food Asset Map. We've had students work with us over the summer. We've been able to integrate some of these projects inside of the classroom and working with different Quest faculty members to come at it more through an academic lens. And I think it's been a really great mutual beneficial relationship. And it usually, it allows students to also make some great connections outside of the community and see if this area is a field that they may want to continue down, which is kind of exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just like to say thank you again so much for being here. I really appreciate your time, and this conversation has been fascinating. I'm really excited to edit this episode and put it out there and share this knowledge with other people. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. I look forward to listening to all of the podcasts.
That's
all
great.
500 of them.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to and supporting this project. I hope that it inspires you to think critically about our food system and listen openly to the perspectives of others. This episode of Savory was created on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. I am deeply humbled to have had the opportunity to live, work, and learn on this land. Creating a podcast is a highly collaborative endeavor. Financial support for Savory came from the Quest Research and Scholarly Works Committee. Savory was produced, recorded, and edited by myself, Marika Dunham, under the guidance of the incredible Dr. Davy. Original music is by Cameron Lee. You can find his work at eelromance.com. And graphic design is by Jessica Matyas. You can follow her work at Matyas Creates on Instagram.